Okay, wait.
One kind request to all the speakers as well. We've gotten so many speakers from across the world here, and there are a lot of sessions back to back. So if you could please keep to your time, that would be wonderful, so that no other session gets, cut short because of your session. And
As
another
you can
thing,
see, we're not shy to
at
break it up.
interrupting, yeah. So we will interrupt. And if you're tweeting to us, please use the hashtag Thai Global Summit. Be fun, show us some pictures or whatever
taking
else you
this
would
off?
like to share. A
Only
very-
our best side, though.
yeah. We have a very interesting session coming up and very, very relevant to all the entrepreneurs and investors in this room, and a question which gets asked all the time. So in the next session, we are going to talk about Indian entrepreneurship, scale, substance, and sustainability.
Great, and we'd like to invite Sanjay Nayar up, who is CEO and Managing Director of KKR.
And I would like to invite Dhanpal Jhaveri, Managing Partner, Everstone Capital. You can do better than this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Check. Hello. Hello. Can someone slightly dim these lights? They're really getting into eyes. Okay, a very good morning to all of you. And it's an early start, but it's kind of filling up well. And first of all, I'd like to thank Sanjay for joining us over here. Thai has been a extremely enterprising and bubbling ecosystem of entrepreneurs. We've here a bunch of entrepreneurs and investors from around the world. The first time this event is being held in Mumbai. And clearly, I think there's a lot of interested and excited faces over here, keen to hear what we have to say about both the economy and investing in the Indian ecosystem. So first of all, Sanjay, you've been now a career banker for over 2 decades. You made a great and very successful transition to being an investor and have built a great franchise for KKR in this part of the world. So what are your views and what have you seen as India has kind of, over the last decade, a couple of decades, I would say, and then more, I would say, immediately in the last few years? What are the stark kind of changes you've seen? And what do you see today as the India of the future? Mike?
Better? Thanks. Yeah, it's working. It's working. Bring it back. Bring it back. Thanks, Dhanpal, and thanks, Thai, for having me here. Firstly, am I audible now? Yeah, so look, I don't want to get into too much macro. I think that'll be boring for everyone. I would say there are 3 or 4 big things in the last few decades. Clearly, you've heard a lot about India growing, consumption, per capita, living standards, urbanization. But I would take it a little differently. In my switch from banking to investing, I think one of the big things that at least I sort of called on was that India is going to be a country that is going to be deficit for capital and technology. And I wouldn't say management resources and expertise, because I think that India has a lot of it. And I think one of the reasons obviously goes back to the fundamental of the economics in this country, which is over, 4 decades you have run very chronic, large fiscal deficits. And the fact of the matter is that when you squeeze out the private savings, you don't have enough real savings available long-term for building real businesses, or what you call real asset creation. And therefore, I think willy-nilly we as companies and entrepreneurs have to depend upon imported capital. Yes, there is domestic capital, but frankly, even the mutual funds and if you look at the FIs coming in, there's a lot of imported capital coming in. Now, there's nothing wrong with that till the local savings build up, but I think we have a long way to go macroeconomically to really have a large pool of long-term sustainable savings in India. And until then, I think foreign investors will be quite important. So I think just representing the private equity asset class, not really a venture guy, I think we have a lot of relevant role to play, a very responsible role to play, and that's, I think, a big driver. I think the second big thing is India is going to grow. I mean, India has to grow. There is just no choice. We are at a kind of a medium level of growth, I would say. It's got a long way to go. And consumption, investment spending, both have to go up. So even if savings don't go up much, I think we have to fill up the gap as the investor class. So I think that's broadly the sort of setup. And I think that makes the thesis of investors who I represent here, I think is a very sustainable thesis for a few more, at least a decade before we see a real buildup of savings in India itself.
So Sanjay, you touched upon investments and you talked about the opportunity to kind of bring capital to India. And we've seen obviously a huge increase in FDI as well as FI flows. Your view, as Mr. Modi talks about getting India to a $5 trillion economy, are these level of flows sufficient? Are you seeing that this is not enough? And where do you think these flows likely should be directed?
I think at a very conceptual level, the flows will match the opportunity. So I think what's more critical is the entrepreneurs, the business models, the business sizes and scale. I think that's what we should really focus on. I think there's enough flows at the right price or the right kind of risk reward, whether it's in the credit side or the equity side. There's a lot of flow for India because India is now no longer the so-called, a problem case. India doesn't have any red lights. From a macro point of view or from a sovereign risk point of view, India is a destination where people would like to invest. But you can't come and just invest if you don't have sizable opportunities. So I think the issue really that I notice sitting where I am is that you've got to find big enough opportunities or big enough areas to grow. And I think that's where the challenge is. And you look around countries like, Indonesia, China, they've made leaps and bounds the way they have progressed in terms of creating big, scalable opportunities in any area. You take healthcare, you take consumption, you take retailing. So I think that's where India has to focus. I wouldn't worry about the flows will come.
Great. Structurally, we are seeing over the last few years, government having taken lots and lots of steps. They seem to be causing a lot of volatility, they're causing a little bit of chaos, and a huge amount of uncertainty in terms of how businesses need to plan going forward. They also at the same time seem to be kind of all the right things, right? GST, people are saying it's a path-breaking reform. At the same time, what we're seeing is things like demonetization causing a lot of chaos. So how do businesses and how do you, because as businesses need to plan, what are your kind of views and thoughts around working with these businesses to kind of plan in a environment where in India, typically you see a one step forward, one step sideways, maybe a one step backward kind of a, situation?
Yeah, look, I think that's a good question. If I put on the foreign investor hat, I think these are all great steps. This is like, as I've said before, this is music to our ears. We have moved away from a paradigm of favoritism. I'm not sure. I mean, the usual word is crony capitalism, but I don't understand what that is. But broadly, favoritism, getting things done. I think we're way away from that scenario, which is great. So, looking at demonetization, driving a digital economy, driving a pan-India value-added tax. These are all great moves. So look, I think it is disruptive. Maybe it could have been implemented better, but I would say if you leave the hiccups aside, that's just a couple of quarters of hiccups. I'm actually all for these kind of changes if they fit into an overall economic game plan that they have. That's a different issue, whether they have one or they don't have one. But these changes, and especially getting away from favoritism and the implementation of the bankruptcy code, again, a little bit patchy, but it's finding its feet now. The Real Estate Regulatory Act. I mean, these are great changes. I think, Dhanpal, this actually brings in more capital and not less. And you get a lot more institutional capital once these things stabilize. So I don't know how to answer your question about working with the companies. We fortunately work with very large companies, so they plan a little better. But I do see the general disruption that has happened. But I would say just give it one more quarter and you will see those things getting behind you. Already you're seeing urban consumption pick up. You're seeing commercial vehicles pick up. You're seeing the impact of the infrastructure spend. So I think whatever the government can do in terms of pushing investment, they are doing. So I wouldn't worry too much about these changes.
So you see the incumbents being better positioned, or do you see the challengers coming in and possibly creating the right opportunities for themselves?
I think in traditional businesses, I'm not seeing too many challenges. That's the problem. Yeah, I think in the whole digital space and in the e-commerce space, there are lots of things going on. But again, I'm not an expert in that area. But in traditional businesses like healthcare, retail, telecom, I mean, we're just seeing the old players becoming quite strong, and they themselves are using disruption to their advantage. I don't see any big disruptors coming in the traditional economies, yeah.
A great point, and I think one of the things we constantly, when we see startups versus seeing the existing kind of large players, and if you look at across sectors, whether it be healthcare, whether it be financial services, whether it be consumer businesses, the question is that there are technologies which are coming in, potential disruptions around those technologies which are coming in, but do you see consumers kind of really adapt or adopt fast enough for the incumbents not be able to keep up? Or do you see that new business models will come in and again, be able to kind of take on the existing players? So I see the classic example of HDFC Bank versus a new age payments business like Paytm, right? And there's constant churn and constant innovation. How do you work, right, in this environment? And how does an HDFC Bank work? And how does a startup like, which is today a very large business like Paytm work? Can both exist?
I think the jury is still out on that. Which model is going to work? I think India is still substantially a brick and mortar economy, and Indian banking system is going to be, thanks to regulations and thanks to, I think, still a bit of shyness towards dramatic innovation in payments and mobility of funds. I think you're going to see Indian banks and models like that sustained for a bit longer. And if the folks like HDFC Bank can innovate, nothing like it. But it's very difficult for legacy banks to innovate and get away from the legacy systems. It takes a very long time. So challenges will come in that space. I think that's a great point you're making. But I come back to the same point. The Indian consumer's got to consume and adapt. And it's happening at a certain age level, but a lot of us are still used to being a lot more physical in our usage. But I think it'll take time. I mean, the way I see things happening in China and some of those markets, I think we still have a long way to go. So I think the HDFC banks of the world will get a bit more time to innovate and adopt.
Okay, let me shift gears and get back to this topic of entrepreneurship. And I think you've had a very interesting experience with some of the Indian entrepreneurs where you've helped them create world-class businesses. A case in point being Alliance Tires. Take us through that journey. Tell us what were your experiences when you got into the business. They already had one successful PE firm which had gone in and supported them and created the initial, I would say, fill-up. But then you were able to work with them and get them to a kind of a completely different standard and world-class. And I think in Indian businesses, one of the things I think which limits Indian businesses is the extent to which they aspire, right? That used to be a big challenge with Indian businesses. A lot of family businesses to get to a point where they got reasonably, I would say, mid-size and get very content. Do you see this new age of entrepreneurs thinking differently, behaving differently, and what is it that your experience with Alliance kind of taught you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think just on the basics of Alliance Tire, this was the fifth or sixth largest tire company in the off-highway tires replacement market. So it's a very specific market. And I think the entrepreneur there in Yogesh was an aspiring individual who thought that he had to shift. And basically, Warburg had really helped him fantastically to create the business. And he was looking for a new partner after 5 years who would take him to the next level of growth. So I think he had the aspiration, and he was thinking pretty much away from his comfort zone of being a number 6 player with an 18%, 20% EBITDA margin. So I think our investment thesis really was to help him focus on exports, open up new white spaces in the Americas, which KKR could do with its global expertise. Also, renewed go-to-market strategy, We helped create another plant in India. So I think those were the basics. We increased the capacity of production, increased the go-to market, had better strategies vis-a-vis logistics. So that was, I think, the basics. I think the more interesting part that I would say what we learned from Alliance and Alliance learned from us, and I think I apply it now to more and more, is that a couple of things. One is that the manager promoter, he had a very small stake, okay, compared to us. But we left him alone. He was the founder, he was the CEO, and we were not all over him. If we had to have a meeting, we would do it outside, we would do it over a drink or whatever. So I think that's number one, leaving founders to behave like founders and to feel like founders and not to feel like employees. And I think that worked really well, and we are applying that in a couple of new platforms that we are backing, just like Avendus. The second thing I think is, you know, I think Indian promoters and companies don't do a good job of giving widespread equity ownership. And we at KKR, and I'm only 9 years here, our founders, Henry and George, make sure that everybody in the firm, from the receptionist to the kitchen staff, has an equity share. I think we helped Yogesh to really have a wide-based equity plan, which he adopted willingly. And I think that created a massive alignment of objectives of where the whole franchise was going. And I think the third thing that we are learning, we're not there, is to help businesses really, really focus on a set of culture and values. And I think that is becoming important in a market like ours. If you don't have a set of culture and values, then you can't rally all the troops in a certain direction. And that's beyond just the business vision. It's more to do with what you stand for as a brand, what you stand for as a company. And I think Alliance did a great job on that as well. So we had a really willing founder who obviously made a lot of money, and he's gone on to sell this company to a Japanese firm whose stock price has moved dramatically, having bought an emerging market business, and he's probably on his third innings now, creating another business. So I think it's been a good story. But the learnings, I think, are that if you can create a sustainable franchise in the long run, I think that really helps.
And maybe if you can dwell upon this fact, right? Because as we see young enterprises grow, I think the point you made about the founder and the founder's influence on the business is almost omnipresent,
Absolutely.
right? But as businesses grow and scale, the lines of accountability and responsibility start getting diffused. The second level management, third level management, as businesses become larger, they become more complex. How does that transition happen, and where have you seen it work? Where have you seen things not work? And how would you kind of, because a lot of, I would say many people in this audience have gone through the similar experiences. But it would be great to see from a capitalist or an investor's perspective is how would one view it, right? Because I think there is an ability for a capitalist to be a little bit dispassionate, separate, I would say a little bit away from the situation, whereas entrepreneurs tend to be very close and very passionate and therefore tend to be sometimes missing the wood for the trees. So if you were to be in that position, or if you've been in that position, how would you kind of advise entrepreneurs?
I'm sorry to interrupt. You have about 7 minutes to go. If we can take a few questions after this from the audience have a few questions.
I have one more question after this, and then...
Cool.
I think that, look, again, there's no, you can't preach to the audience, but my learning is that successful founders that we have worked with and the unsuccessful ones which we have in our portfolio, it's not like we have all roses, we have quite a few mediocre outcomes. And those have always been on lack of management depth or lack of, or maybe the founder dominance or CEO dominance. So I think if you can really build a very good first level, second level, have a kind of an executive committee or management committee where you have regular reviews, regular alignment of objectives, regular performance, I think that's great. I think second thing I find that when the management speaks openly and transparently with the CEO or with the investor and gives us the bad news first or gives the management the bad news, I find that there are a lot of companies we have where people are scared of giving the bad news, and we just don't even know what's going on. We only hear the good news. And I'm applying that to us, but I really mean by the founder and the CEO. So I think an ability to create a sense of openness is very critical. So I think if you have founders in this room, which I think a lot of young entrepreneurs are, I would be very, very focused on making sure that your team feels like they're a partner in the business besides the equity ownership. make sure that they have the ability to speak up to you, challenge you, and how you create that is up to each one. Different industries are different. You can't have a big management committee or partnership in every industry. But I find if you're the only guy on the job, you and your CFO know it all. I think those get challenged very easily, and we have a 100% track record, okay, of having mediocre outcomes in those companies where we got the top man right, but nothing else right below that. And when we guys make investments, in a typical 60-day diligence period, all that you see, besides the advisors, is the top man, the CFO. Now we have learned we got to do much more in-depth management assessment, do a 360-degree feedback even before we sign the documentation, so we get to know how centralized is the place. Boy, this has been one learning. We haven't failed because of bad business model. We have failed because the management depth was not adequate, and when we got challenged by economy, GST, whatever,
I have a question. I have a question over here from an audience member.
Sure.
Would you please?
Yeah, hi. My name is Ashish Manchanda from Boone Castle Media and Entertainment. I believe you also do media funds. Can you hear me, sir?
No, it's not very audible. Can you just speak up a bit?
Can you make sure that they hear it? Okay. Yeah, hi. So my question is regarding how good are the investors in believing in talent within our own country, because we see that we have to go outside to get in investors to believe in us, especially in our industry, which is media and entertainment. We are on a verge of an explosion, but our Indian investors either do not understand what we're doing or not even willing to understand. So we've gone around a bit already, and we feel that a lot of time the investors are not clued in, and because of business plans and other matters, whereas we've seen people in the entertainment business, right from Sequoia, from Don Valentine to Arthur C. Rock, where they've got one-page business plan from talent that they know are super talented, have been in the process of setting up Silicon Valley from dust and bringing it up to people who have backed up people like Spielberg and Lucas.
Okay, we get the question.
We get the question. So basically what you're saying is,
where are those superstar, rock star investors in our country where the talent is waiting to be taken up seriously?
I think there'll be a lot of superstar, rockstar investors in this country who will take offense to that. But I think to your point, the question really is that for new businesses or new business models, is there enough understanding amongst the investor community to be able to appreciate and be able to back what you call simply a business plan on a paper napkin, right? I think, at least from our perspective, I think there is enough and more growing community of such investors. The challenge always remains is that people don't necessarily know what works in US is necessarily what will work in India. And that's where really I think the disconnect is in most of the times in what the entrepreneur thinks the business has to be and what the investor believes it could be, right?
Okay. Just to add to that, I think one of the things I said in the beginning is you don't have the right investment pool in India. So you should be really asking, where are those kind of savings that can take that kind of risk in media and entertainment? It's not that big. You got 10 family offices and a few rich individuals. You don't have the insurance companies, the pension funds, the endowments in India. So we got a long way to go. So it's not about superstar investors like Dhanpal. It's about the money they represent and the money we represent, yeah.
I don't think any question you have. I just will say one thing. I pitched to Donald Valentine once, and even in America, as American, not the easiest thing to get money from Donald Valentine. So while he may be a rock star, not good odds to secure money from that man. So
we've run out of time for this session. Sorry about that.
So I had just one question.
Please.
Sanjay, you've been an angel investor in Falguni, your wife's business, Nykaa. Tell us about that story and how was that a story which kind of, took form over the kitchen table, or was it something in your KKR offices?
Parag is laughing. Okay, I think you should just go shopping on Nykaa.com. No, I think, look, I think whatever I could contribute to her, I have not really, the deal with my wife is that I won't interfere in the business. So I'll treat her like a founder, and I will not interfere at all. So I follow that principle. Second, I just told her we should be very clear that we don't break any rules. There are many rules in multi-brand retail. We don't want to be cute about anything. And the third thing I told her is the same, that with your top management, hire good people and just build a good set of culture and values. And I think they've stuck to that. But look, the rest of the business she's built, My first learning is that I don't interfere at all. And if I beg for information if I want some, I don't demand it. Otherwise, there'll be a problem.
So I'm not
Anyway,
sure if that's an advice as an investor or a good husband, but well noted.
all right, thanks, guys.
Well, it's a great marriage, so it's worked.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, and thank you all.
Dhanpal and Sanjay. It's a little token of appreciation from Ty, please. Thank you.
So how
Yeah.
many
So,
entrepreneurs do we
Dhanpal,
have here
Sanjay.
that are not from India?
Can we have a picture, please?
How many entrepreneurs are here that are outside of India? Raise your hand. Stand up. All right.
We just want you to loosen up a little. Everybody is just like,
Excellent. Congratulations. Thanks for being here.
thank you.